of us have habits we want to break, and probably some habits other people want us to change. To make those adjustments, habits expert James Clear says we should think small.
And this is James Clear. He's the author of the New York Times bestseller, Atomic Habits. He's joining us now to explain how you can build good habits and break bad ones.
His newsletter has over 2 million subscribers. He's also a sought-after speaker at Fortune 500 companies, and his work is used by teams in the NFL, MLB, and the NBA.
I'm James Clear, and this is Masterclass. I want to start this journey on habits in an unexpected place. The world of competitive cycling, where every variable matters. And this story will show you how incremental moves and changes can make a big difference on improving your habits. You know, cycling is a competitive sport, and around 2003, 2004, the British cycling team found themselves in this interesting position, which is they were trying really hard. They were training hard. They had all kinds of, top-tier resources and coaching, and their performance wasn't there. And around this time, they hired this new performance director, this coach by the name of Dave Brailsford. And so he had this concept, he had this idea that he called the aggregation of marginal gains. And the way that he described it was the 1% improvement in nearly everything that we do related to cycling. So they started with a bunch of small changes that you would expect a cycling team to focus on. Like they put slightly lighter tires on the bike, they designed a more ergonomic seat, they asked each rider to try different types of massage gels to see which one would lead to the best muscle recovery. They hired a surgeon to come in and teach the riders how to wash their hands to reduce the risk of catching a cold or getting the flu. They even asked each rider to try a dozen different types of pillows to see which one led to the best night's sleep for each person. And then they would have them bring that pillow on the road with them to hotels for the Tour de France and their major races. And so Brailsford said, look, if we can actually do this, right, if we can make all these little 1% improvements related to cycling, then I think we can win a Tour de France within 5 years. Now, he ended up being wrong. They won the Tour de France in 3 years, and then they repeated again the 4th year with a different rider. So this idea that 1% improvements are not just kind of nice to have, they're not just a bonus or a little bit extra, but actually can be the pathway to unlocking elite levels of success. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to do something radical. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to do something earth-shattering. It just means that you need to do the reasonable thing, the sustainable thing, the small thing, consistently over a broad span of time. In many ways, greatness is consistency, or maybe we should say consistency is its own form of greatness. And by showing up each day, even if it's in a very small way, you can often surprise yourself with the results that you can get over a year or 2 or 3. There are many reasons why habits matter. Habits can influence so many different areas of life. Almost every result you get is a lagging measure of the habits that precede them. So your physical fitness is a lagging measure of your training habits. Your bank account is a lagging measure of your financial habits. Your productivity is a lagging measure of your prioritization habits. Even little stuff like the amount of clutter in your living room is a lagging measure of your cleaning habits. And so often in life, what we want is for better outcomes to happen. What we want is to have better results. But it's kind of one of these ironic things. The results are not actually the thing that needs to change. It's like fix the inputs and the outputs will fix themselves. Adjust the habits that precede the results and you'll be carried naturally to a different destination. If you think about what you do, take it in the workplace, for example, there's almost no result that you get at work that's just a single instance and then you're done. It's the accumulation of many efforts, of many actions that you take that really delivers a better outcome. So if you can master your habits, it doesn't necessarily guarantee results, but it's hard to find something that puts you in a better position to get good results. For me, the idea that small changes could lead to bigger results actually sprouted from a horrible accident. An accident that changed the course of my life. So my sophomore year of high school, last day of the school year, I suffered this injury where I was hit in the face with a baseball bat. It was an accident. My classmate took a swing and the bat slipped out of his hands, kind of rotated like helicopter style through the air and struck me right between the eyes. I lost consciousness, took me out on a stretcher, went to the ambulance. On the way to the hospital, I lost the ability to breathe on my own. They started to intubate me, pump breaths in by hand. I had a couple seizures. It took about a month for my eye to recede back to its normal level. Couldn't drive a car for 9 months. My first physical therapy sessions, I was practicing basic motor patterns like walking in a straight line. All I wanted to do was get back on the baseball field. I was a high school baseball player. I was excited about it. Like that's all I wanted to do was get back and play and be a normal kid again. But it was this time in my life when I had to start small. I wanted to fulfill my potential. So somehow I kind of weaseled my way onto this college squad 2 years later. Junior year, I was team captain, and then senior year, I ended up being academic All-American. I never ended up playing professionally, but I do think I was able to fulfill my potential. I was able to make the most of what I had. But we all have challenges that we face, and that was one of mine. And one day at a time, I improved my sleep habits, study habits, strength training habits to get better. And I was able to take this horrible accident and discover that small steps can make a big impact. There are these common narratives that we have about how habits are formed and how difficult it is to change your habits and that kind of thing. And one of the common stories that we tell ourselves is, well, maybe if you really wanted it, then you would do it. You know, maybe if you had more discipline or grit or willpower or persistence. And I don't want to totally dismiss that. Like, certainly discipline and grit and willpower are very important qualities in life. But I don't think that that answer is quite right. You know, I think many people, certainly someone watching this right now, genuinely does want to improve, genuinely does want to fulfill their potential, genuinely does want to perform at a high level. So what I always say is, look, if you're struggling to improve, the problem isn't you, the problem is your system. The problem is the approach that you're taking, the process that you have, and the way that you're trying to attack the problem. What we find is that there are actually many things that influence habits. Willpower is just one of many variables. Rather than asking myself, what could I do on my best day? What would it look like to have peak performance? Ask yourself, what could I stick to even on my worst day? So I think willpower will always play a factor in whether you show up each day and perform, but it's best to try to optimize the other factors so that you need the least amount of willpower possible to follow through on your habits. The San Antonio Spurs, very successful NBA basketball franchise. They've won 5 NBA championships at this point, and they have this quote hanging in their locker room, and it says something to the effect of, every time I feel like giving up, I think about the stonecutter. Takes his hammer and bangs on the rock 100 times without it splitting in two. And then at the 101st blow, it cracks. And I know that it wasn't the 101st that did it, but all the 100 that came before. And man, that quote from Jacob Reese, that idea, that can apply to so many different things in life. You know, it wasn't the last workout that made you fit, it was all the 100 that came before. If you can master the art of showing up, if you can continue to build this consistency, if you can keep hammering on the rock, then 2 months or 6 months or 2 years later, you have the result that you were trying to show up for. So the little mantra I like to keep in mind is, when dreaming or when making plans, think big, but when executing, think small. And that same mantra can also apply to this masterclass. This class is a good example. You know, you can break it down, just watch it one chapter at a time, 10 minutes a day for 10 days. And then take that idea, take the concepts from that chapter, and then go and apply them to the work that you're doing or the life that you're living. And by scaling it down, you make the class easier to digest, easier to apply, because you're not trying to do 10 different things at once, and hopefully easier to get the results that you're looking for. I think what I hope for you to get out of this class is a new mindset and approach. So just a different line of attack, a different way of thinking about habits that feels reasonable, that feels sustainable, that feels like, hey, this is something I can take and I can go ahead and apply it to my daily life and work. And I also want it to be very actionable. You know, I want you to be able to watch these videos and to feel like I have something that I can apply right now. I have something that I can implement in my life and in my work. I have something that I can take away and get better results from. Coming up, these days, people are too focused on results and rarely focused on ways to get there. I'm going to give you one tool, and it's important. Set a system, not a goal. We all do it. We set a New Year's resolution, exercise more, lose weight, sell 25% more than last year. We all have something we want to achieve. But how long before we fail and then feel defeated? One of my rules for success is to forget about setting goals. Focus instead on your system. What is a system? It's a collection of daily habits that you follow. I like the symbolism of an iceberg. Your goals and desired outcomes are what you see just above the surface of the water. But it's your system, your collection of daily habits, which allows those goals to even be achieved. That's the mass of the iceberg below the surface, allowing it to float. And if there is ever a gap between your goal and your system, if there's ever a gap between your desired outcome and your daily habits will always win. The system will always win, right? You will almost always be carried inevitably to the results that your habits are driving you toward. What is your goal? What is your system? I mean, if you're a basketball coach, your goal might be to win the championship, but your system is how you recruit, the way you train and practice each day, on the court, the way that you review film, that's part of your system. If you're an entrepreneur, your goal might be to build a multi-million-dollar business. Your system is how you recruit and train people who come in, your onboarding sequence, the way that you test product ideas and get them in front of customers, your marketing campaigns, that's the system for running the business. I always think it's interesting if you ask yourself, hey, if I didn't focus on the goal at all and only focused on the system, would I still get good results? Like if you were the basketball coach and you said, listen, we're not going to talk about the championship at all. We're not going to look at the scoreboard throughout the game. We're just going to focus on performing this system of how we train, how we execute a practice, the way we review film, and do that to the best of our ability. You would probably still win some games. You probably would do pretty well. Similar thing for the entrepreneur. If it's just about having the best-selling product in a category or launching a best-selling book or achieving a certain amount of revenue, then maybe you're focused a little too much on the wrong thing. But if it's about mastering the system, getting the right people on board, launching the best PR campaign or marketing campaign you can, developing the most compelling product possible, now you're in a good position to get the results that you want. By emphasizing the system and de-emphasizing the goal, I think you put yourself in a better position to, ironically, ultimately achieve the goal. A good example of this is Bill Walsh, Super Bowl winning coach. I think he won 3 Super Bowls with the San Francisco 49ers. And he had this concept where he said the score takes care of itself. And everything that they did at the organization was organized around creating a championship team, but they didn't talk about the score. They didn't worry about the scoreboard. All they did was focus on the system that they were building each day, the way they were training, the way they were practicing, the way they were recruiting. And if they do that well, then they're in a position to win a lot of Super Bowls. So if you're trying to translate your goal into a sustainable system, you need to do a couple things. First thing you need to do is identify the goal that you're trying to achieve. So you got to figure out, what am I optimizing for? Second thing is we want to break that goal into smaller habits. So what are the daily actions, if I do them consistently, they're going to lead me toward that ultimate outcome? And then the third and final thing is you take those daily habits and you focus on repeating them over a broad span of time. And it's actually this act of repetition, this act of consistency, that's going to lead you toward that ultimate outcome that you want. So it's all about translating this big picture vision that you have into a small daily habit that you can perform consistently. So if your goal is to learn the piano, maybe you start by learning a tune with your right hand first, and then you play maybe an accompanying chord with your left hand, and then eventually you put the two hands together. And so it's this gradual progression of the system of learning how to play the piano. Maybe your goal is to read 30 books a year, but your system is, I read 1 page before bed each night, and then maybe after you've done that for a month, then you start to scale up and do 2 pages, and then after 6 months, you're doing 5 pages, and so on. And the idea is ultimately you're building this reading habit where now each night you're getting in bed and you read for 15 minutes a night. Maybe your goal is to get in shape, but your system is the way that you arrange your workout clothes the night before and get your water bottle filled up, and the tracking that you use to track your habits, whether it's an app or notebook, and the reward that you set for yourself, like you get to eat your favorite meal when you finish a full week of workout. And so it's by scaling these big goals down and turning them into something sustainable and that you can chunk and start to layer on top of each other day in and day out that you ultimately are led to the big picture goal that you want to achieve. In many ways, we don't rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the level of our systems. And this is so obvious in so many areas of life. You start to look around and you realize, presumably every athlete at the Olympic Games has the goal of winning the gold medal. The goal is not the thing that determines the outcome. It's how well they sleep the night before, their coaching and strategy for the event, genetic ability, there are all kinds of factors. Or if you have a job opening at a company, presumably every candidate that applies for the job, let's say it's 100 people, all 100 of them have the same goal. The goal is not the thing that determines the outcome. It's levels of education, experience, presentation skills in the interview, networking, and who they know at the company. Goals might be necessary for success. They might be a part of the process, but they're not sufficient for success on their own. And in fact, what we really want is to emphasize and spend most of our time on building a better system, not trying to think of a better goal. And so it's actually this package of behaviors, this collection of habits, the system that you're running, that determines the result that you get to. I'm setting this up kind of like a dichotomy, right? We have goals and we have systems, but of course you have both. And it's up to you to decide, what are you optimizing for? What are your goals? But my encouragement, my suggestion, is to spend the vast majority of your time focused on building a better system. How do you optimize the gears of this machine that you're running? Each habit is like a little gear in the overall machine. And when you put them all together, boy, you can have this engine really humming along. But if you're focused so much on the outcome and the goal and not enough on the system, then it's just a dream and you don't have a good path for getting there. Let's say you want to lose 20 pounds in 3 months. You may achieve the goal with a lot of sweat, exercise, and willpower, but once you reach the goal, you might not be able to maintain the weight loss. Without a substantial system, you may gain it back. Goals have an end point. You achieve the goal or you don't. Systems last forever. So think a little bit less about the results and a little bit more about the habits that will get you there. Don't put pressure on yourself to be perfect. It's not going to work that way. It doesn't work that way for anybody. And something that I've noticed, the more that I've studied top performers in various industries, all these people, the people that get exceptional results, they're human. They fall off course just like everybody else. The thing that they tend to be pretty good at is getting back on track quickly. And what you find is that if the reclaiming of a habit is fast, the breaking of it doesn't matter that much, because you get to the end of the year and it's just a little blip on the radar. And this mantra that I like to keep in mind, this philosophy that I like to keep top of mind when I'm building habits, is never miss twice. So, maybe you've been following this new diet for 7 or 8 or 9 days, and then on the 10th day, you binge eat a pizza. Well, I wish that hadn't happened, but never miss twice, so let's make sure the next meal is a healthy one. Or in my case, the habit that kind of launched my career was I wrote a new article every Monday and Thursday, and I did that for 3 years. Well, if I missed on Monday, I wish that hadn't happened, but let me pour all my energy to getting back on track and getting an article out on Thursday. And again, if you reclaim the habit quickly, the breaking of it doesn't matter that much. I think this is really about emphasizing this idea that it's not about being perfect, it's about being consistent. And if you can get back on track quickly, then you solve the problem at the source, which is you don't want slipping up to become a new habit. I think most of us have felt this just from going through life, which is it's almost never the first mistake that ruins you. It's like the spiral of repeated mistakes that follows. It's letting slipping up become a new habit. That's the real problem. And so if you can avoid that and get back on track quickly, if you can never miss twice, then you kind of solve that problem and you can just get back on track. To change your habits, change your system. Goals are results. Systems are about process. Start with systems when you want to change your goals. Goals are short-term. Systems are long-term. All right, so here's a quick assignment for you. Just a couple questions to think about. The first is, can my current habits carry me to my desired future? So as you're thinking about the system that you're trying to build, take assessment of your current habits and are you on the right path? Is this a trajectory that's going to carry you forward? And then once you start to think about that a little more carefully, what would it look like to build a good system for the goals that you have? If you're going to deconstruct that goal, what are the fundamental pieces of the system that you're running that would carry you toward that? So what are the little gears in this overall machine? And take a little bit of time to think about that, to deconstruct the systems that you need to build to achieve the goals that you want to achieve. Coming up, want to build a new habit that sticks? It may be all about creating a new identity. We often talk about habits as mattering because of the external results they can get us. We'll say things like, habits will help you be more productive, or they'll help you make more money, or get in shape, or reduce stress. And it's true, habits can help you do all those things, and that's great. But the real reason that habits matter, the true reason that habits make a difference, is because every action you take is like a vote for the type of person you wish to become. We have stories that we tell ourselves that are helpful, but also have stories that we tell ourselves that are hurtful. Some of them are stories that you don't even think you're telling yourself. Like, for a long time, I didn't even realize that saying something like, I have a sweet tooth, like that's a story that you tell yourself about what you eat and what's normal for you and what type of thing you crave and desire. There's nothing wrong with eating sweets, but you just want to keep it in the right zone, you know, like you don't want it to become this thing that overpowers your whole identity. I have a sweet tooth, I'm bad at directions, I'm terrible at math, I'm the type of person who never remembers people's names. You know, these stories that we tell ourselves, whatever version of them that they are they helping you or hindering you? Are they serving the type of person that you wish to become, or are they holding you back from that? Identity is a two-way street, you know? It can either support the habits that you're trying to build, or it can hinder them and prevent them. And so it's worth it to do this little kind of self-assessment and try to figure out, what stories am I telling myself? What is hard for me to overcome because of the narrative that I have in my head? I'm not a member of the military, but I've heard from a variety of my readers who are. And this interesting pattern has come up, which is many of them, you know, they spend their career serving, and a large part of their identity is being a soldier. You know, it's what they identify as. It's a huge part of their life story. And then, you know, once they finish serving, they enter civilian life and they're done with that portion of their career, they sometimes have this conflict. You know, I thought I was a soldier. That's what I identified as. That's who I view myself as, but I'm not that anymore. So what am I now? I think one of the key things here is when you lose an aspect of your identity like that, or it feels like you've lost that element of your identity, it can become useful to focus on the aspects of that identity that translate across context. So for example, maybe you can't be a soldier anymore, but you can still be a good teammate, but you can still be the type of person who finishes their mission. Once you find those elements of your identity that translate across context, you're in a better position to feel like you didn't lose yourself, to feel like you have habits that can continue to serve the core of who you are, but also address the new situation that you find yourself in. You know, sometimes I think about the process of behavior change kind of like the layers of an onion. So the outermost layer is your outcomes or your results. And this is the obvious thing when people think about changing their behavior. Oh, I want to, you know, make more money, or I want to lose 40 pounds, or whatever it is. There's some kind of result that they're shooting for. The next layer of the onion, one layer in, is process. That's your system, your plan, your approach, the strategy that you have for achieving that result. So the first layer is, say, I want to lose 40 pounds. The next layer in, the plan is, okay, if I'm going to do that, I need to go to the gym 4 days a week, and I need to follow this kind of diet and so on. I think there's a core of behavior change, a deeper layer that often gets overlooked, which is, who is the type of person that I am? What is my identity? Outcomes, process, identity. And often we start at the outside and work our way in. And our assumption is, you know what, if I can achieve this result by following this plan, I'll just sort of become the kind of person that I hope to be. We sort of implicitly think, you know, if I had these results, I would be a lot happier. I would be a lot better off. And my argument, my encouragement is to reverse the process, to start at the core and to say, first, who is the type of person I wish to become? What is the type of identity I want to reinforce? And then, if I want to be that kind of person, what's the process? What are the habits that I need to have to reinforce that identity? And finally, trusting that the outermost layer, the results, the outcomes, will come along the path or along the way of becoming that kind of person. You know, so if you want to reshape your identity, if you're trying to build or foster a new identity, there are really 2 steps. You want to start with figuring out the type of person you wish to become, and then you come up with small wins or little habits that contribute toward that reinforce this desired identity. So it's very simple. You know, let's say you want to become a writer. So your identity is, I'm the type of person who writes each day. And then your system is, I sit down at my desk at 9 a.m. and I pull up a blank document and I write 100 words. Let's say you're trying to get in shape. Your identity is, I'm the type of person who doesn't miss workouts. Your system is, I wake up at 7 a.m. each day, put on my workout clothes, walk outside, and, you know, walk around the block twice. Let's say we're trying to focus on relationships, and so you want to become the type of person who is always making your partner's life easier, your spouse's life is easier. So you could say something like, identity is, I'm the type of person who makes each day a little bit better for my spouse. And then system is I try to find one thing each day that I can take off their plate, something that, I'm thinking ahead for them and they don't have to focus on everything themselves. There are many different forms that this can take, but those are a few different examples of what it might look like to take your ultimate goal, translate it into an identity, and then figure out a habit that reinforces being that kind of person. And so the small habits that you perform each day, they reinforce your desired identity. They cast votes for being that kind of person. And as you show up in these small ways, whether it's sending one email or writing one sentence or meditating for 1 minute, they're small actions in the moment, but they provide evidence of being that kind of person. And the more that you build up this body of evidence, the more you have a reason to believe in that aspect of your story. And this becomes really powerful in the long run because once you start to believe in a story, once you start to have evidence for something, once you start to take pride in that aspect of who you are, man, you have every reason in the world to stick with the habit. Like if you take pride in the size of your biceps, you never skip arm day at the gym. If you take pride in how your hair looks, you have this long, complicated hair care routine, you do it every day. In a sense, the person who feels like, hey, this is just part of who I am, they don't have to motivate themselves to do the habit in the same way that somebody who's just getting started might. By linking your habits to your identity, by thinking about how your habits reinforce your identity, you're actually capturing probably the most powerful thing that habits can do, which is they can help shape the type of person that you wish to become. One of the quintessential bad habits is smoking, and the connection between smoking and identity, it's strong. Let's say you have two people, you walk into a room, and there's a carton of cigarettes on the counter. And the first person takes a look at the cigarettes, and you're like, hey, would you like one? And they're like, oh, no, thanks, I'm trying to quit. And the second person, you say, hey, would you like one? And they say, oh, no, thanks, I'm not a smoker. And they both have done the same thing, right, which is turn down a cigarette. But they've done it in a very different way. Because the first person still identifies as a smoker, and they're trying to stop. The second person no longer identifies that way. Oh, no, thanks, it's not who I am. The difference between those two frames of mind, I think, reveals a lot about what's going on internally for those people. If you can reframe your habits so that it's not part of your identity, it's not that you're trying to quit smoking, you are returning to being a non-smoker, right? Presumably there was some point in your life when you didn't smoke cigarettes when you were a kid or whatever. You've done it before. How can you return to this identity that you previously had? Smoking is a quintessential example of a bad habit, and it's kind of, very easy to see. But this same methodology, the same line of thinking can apply to almost any habit in life. What is the story that you have about who you are and why it's part of your identity? And can you start to reframe that a little bit? Can you give yourself a different lens to look at the problem through? And if so, you're probably better positioned to release the desire for the habit. There's the story about Magic Johnson that he had this very successful playing career. And after he finished, he wanted to start a business career, wanted to transition. And the transition actually wasn't super smooth for him. It had a little bit of challenge. He had trouble getting funding early on or trouble getting people to just say, hey, yeah, this is something we'll support you in. He went to the owner of the Lakers and asked, hey, can you teach me more about business? Can you show me more things here? And eventually utilized some of those lessons and funding to get into the business world. And although he made over $100 million during his playing career, he's made much more money from his business career. But even for someone famous and well-established like that, the transition to a new chapter was not seamless. If you can keep that in mind as you transition to your next chapter or your new season, realize that this is a process and that there are lessons that we can take from the previous chapters and apply to the new one. But that doesn't mean it's going to happen overnight, and it doesn't work that way for anyone. So a quick assignment for you as we've talked about identity and habits and how they connect. The core question to ask yourself is, what am I reinforcing? So when you think about your habits, what identity is being served there? What identity is being reinforced? And maybe go a step further and ask yourself, who is the type of person I wish to become? And what habits can I build to reinforce becoming that kind of person? And over the broad span of time, as you cast more votes for being that way, you're going to find yourself believing in it. Coming up, why do we form the habits we do? And how can we change them? Would you believe this cat has the answers? In the late 1800s, there was this famous psychology experiment done, kind of laid the foundation for our current understanding of habit formation and how habits are built. There's this researcher named Edward Thorndike, and he had this interesting little device. He would put a cat inside a large box, and there would be some way of opening the box. Usually it'd be something simple like pressing on a lever or a little button or pulling a cord. And when you first put the cats in, they don't know what's going on, so they're just kind of walking around, and they like to get out, but they're kind of pushing on the walls or poking their nose in the corner. And then eventually, they stumble upon the lever, and they step on it, the door opens, and they can run out. Well, he would put each cat in there maybe 20 or 30 or 40 times, and he would measure each trial. And what he found was that in the early trials, it would take, on average, a couple minutes for them to get out of the box. But by the time you get to the 20th or 30th or 40th instance of them being put in the box, they were escaping, on average, in about 5 to 10 seconds. And they knew exactly what to do. They knew exactly, you drop them in, you close it up, they would say, all right, fine, I'll just go over, I'll press the lever, and then I'll walk right back out. And they would do this over and over again. And each time they exited the box, they would get a little bowl of food. The same thing that happened for the cats there happens to us every day in our lives. We're always trying new things, experimenting with different strategies or choices. And then eventually we start to come across a strategy that works for us. And we realize, oh, this is what I need to do to get the result that I want. What I think is interesting about this is that there are all sorts of habits that you have that are not necessarily optimal, but they solve the problem that you're facing. I think this is actually a pretty good definition for a habit. They are the solutions or the strategies that we follow to solve the problems we repeatedly face in life. So what we're kind of describing here is the process of learning, the process of going through a feedback loop. And the more that a strategy or behavior reinforces the type of feeling that you want or gives you some kind of pleasurable or enjoyable result, the more likely you are to repeat it in the future. And the more that it gives you a negative consequence or something undesirable, the less likely you are to repeat it in the future. And so it's this notion of a feedback loop, the process of learning, that drives all habit formation and eventually trains you to repeat certain behaviors more or less automatically. I like to divide a habit into 4 different steps. And I think if you understand these 4 steps, you not only understand what a habit is and how it works, but ultimately you have 4 different places where you can intervene. So it opens up the world for you to have kind of 4 different levers to improve the odds that a good behavior will happen or that a bad behavior will be avoided. So let's go through these from a high level. So real quick, there are 4 steps that all habits follow: cue, craving, response, and reward. Right? Cue, craving, response, and reward. So the cue is a trigger that tells your brain to initiate the habit. So it's just something that gets your attention. Maybe you're walking down the sidewalk and your phone buzzes in your pocket. That's a physical cue. It starts the habit of checking your phone. Or perhaps you're driving and you hear a siren and it's an ambulance behind you. That's an auditory cue. It starts the habit of pulling to the side of the road. You see a plate of cookies on the counter in the kitchen. That's a visual cue that starts the habit of eating a cookie. Okay, so it gets your attention, something that you notice. So the next thing that happens is your brain makes a prediction about what that cue means. So for example, you see the plate of cookies on the counter in the kitchen, and that's a visual cue, and your brain predicts, hey, that'll be sweet, sugary, tasty, enjoyable. So it's actually the favorable meaning that you assign to a cookie, this prediction that it'll be enjoyable, that gives you this desire, this motivation, this urge to act. So I call that the craving. Now, the craving motivates you or compels you to take an action. So this is the 3rd step, the response. You walk over, you pick the cookie up, you take a bite. And then finally, there's a reward. Oh, it is in fact sweet, sugary, tasty, enjoyable. And now, not every behavior in life is rewarding. Sometimes things are just kind of neutral and don't really mean a whole lot. Sometimes there's a consequence or a cost to the behavior. But if a behavior is not rewarding, if it's not pleasurable or enjoyable or meaningful in some way, it's hard for it to become a habit because your brain wants some positive emotional signal, some way to mark the experience and say, hey, this is worth remembering. This is worth repeating in the future. If you face a problem over and over again throughout life, you're eventually going to come up with a solution that serves the problem. So for example, let's say that you come home from work each night and you feel stressed and exhausted. It's like 6:30, 7 p.m., something like that. Well, in a sense, the feeling of being exhausted after a long day of work, that's a problem that needs to be solved. And you can imagine people solving this problem in very different ways. One person might solve it by going for a run for 30 minutes. Another person might solve it by smoking a cigarette. A third person might solve it by playing video games for 30 minutes. And all of those habits are solutions to the same underlying problem of feeling exhausted. And I think what's interesting in the situation you get into when you're an adult is there are many solutions that you've inherited throughout your childhood and adolescence. There are things that you've just kind of stumbled into. But what are the odds that the habits you have are the optimal way to solve the problems you repeatedly face in life? It's pretty unlikely that your current set of habits is optimal, is the perfect way to do it or the best way to do it. And as soon as you realize that, you can take a step back and start to self-assess and say, okay, is there a better way to solve this underlying problem? Is there a better way to get to the end result that I want? A healthier way, a kinder way, a more productive way? And once you start to ask yourself that line of questioning, you start to see all sorts of areas and opportunities for improvement. So ultimately, we're not that different than Thorndike's cats. We're just going through life and experimenting with different solutions and trying to get to the desired result. But we do have one thing that they didn't have. They only had one way out of the box, but we often have many different ways that we can solve a habit. And so it's up to you to decide which strategy do you want to take or which one can serve you best. The habit loop consists of 4 steps: cue, craving, response, and reward. This 4-step process is divided into 2 phases: the problem phase and the solution phase. As an assignment, I want you to identify a habit you currently have and chart out the cue, craving, response, and reward for that habit. I think this will be eye-opening for you. Okay, so we have these 4 steps: cue, craving, response, reward. And what I like to do is make this actionable. How do I turn it into something that I can utilize in daily life and work? And so I've come up with what I call the 4 laws of behavior change. And there's one for each of those 4 steps. So those 4 laws are: make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, and make it satisfying. We're going to unpack those next. My first law of behavior change is make it obvious. If you take a trip to Japan and you look at the bullet trains, the Shinkansen, they have this interesting system. They call it pointing and calling. As a train pulls into the station, you'll see the conductor kind of pointing at the sign or pointing at the signal on the track. Cleaners come on board to clean the trains after the passengers get off. They point and say all clear. When the train pulls out of the station, the conductor points at the speedometer and says we're going, at a certain speed. And over again, you'll see this pattern happening. And this system, which, as I said, they refer to as pointing and calling, they do it because it raises the level of awareness for what's going on. When the train conductors use all their senses, eyes, hands, mouth, ears, they're way more likely to notice potential hazards. They make them obvious. The New York City subway actually implemented a similar strategy, and they saw a dramatic decrease in the number of accidents on the subway. They didn't even use the pointing and calling method. They just pointed. The purpose of this strategy of pointing and calling is that it helps raise a behavior from something that's automatic and implicit, and it raises it to a conscious level of awareness. The process of behavior change almost always starts with self-awareness. Becoming self-aware, becoming more cognizant of what you're actually doing each day, puts you in a better position to shape and transform your habits and behaviors. This is why it can be useful to just, when you pull out of your garage, you might do some pointing and calling. You say, I have my keys, I have my wallet, I have my phone. Or I have a friend who, anytime she pulls out of her garage, she says, I'm closing their garage door down. She presses the button. And just the act of doing things that way makes it more likely that you'll remember or notice what you're actually doing. So if you remember, we unpack those 4 steps that all habits go through: cue, craving, response, and reward. Make it obvious is all about the cue. It's all about noticing the cues that prompt your behavior, the things that lead you into the habits that you're trying to perform. So what are some strategies we can use to raise our level of awareness about habits, how they're formed, and what we're actually doing? Once you start to notice them, then you can start to design them. There's this common myth or story with habits and behavior change, which is, it's so hard to change your habits, so difficult to change your behavior. We have to work so hard to build new routines. The truth is, actually, your brain is incredible at changing your behavior. You're changing your behavior all the time. We change based on every room we're in, the people we're around, the context we're surrounded by. It's one of the core jobs of your brain is to adjust your behavior based on the context that you find yourself in. The difficult part is, are you just reacting to the context you're in, or are you designing the habits that you're trying to build? And if you want to design them, if you want to be in control of the process, then you need to raise your level of self-awareness and begin to notice what you're actually doing. Take stock of the current habits you have and whether they serve you, and then you're in a better position to shape your habits rather than to simply react with them. So in the 1800s, there's a philosopher and writer named Denis Diderot. He put together one of the first encyclopedias of the time. That was what he was known for. And his work there was praised by many different rulers and politicians and leaders of the era. Catherine the Great actually was really a fan of his encyclopedia. And there's this story that as his daughter was about to be married, he was kind of hard up for money and was in a tough financial position. And Catherine the Great found out about this, and so she said, "Hey, you know what? I'll buy your personal library for you. You can keep the books. Just look after them for me." So she paid him this large sum for his personal library. And so suddenly he came into all this money at once. And he, of course, put some of it towards his daughter's wedding and her dowry and all that sort of thing. He also saved some for himself. And so Diderot took some of this money that he received from Catherine the Great, and after paying for his daughter's wedding, he bought himself this nice robe, and suddenly it was very nice and elegant. And he thought, well, if I have this robe, I don't want to sit in this old chair that I have. I need to buy a new, comfortable, up-to-date chair. And so he bought a new chair. And then he was like, well, the chair looks a little out of place in the living room here. I should buy a new rug, and then I should get art for the walls and additional furniture, and on and on and on. And this tendency for one behavior to lead to the next, or for one action to feed this momentum in this buying cycle, is what we now call the Diderot effect. And you see it in all kinds of areas. I know for myself, when I got a new car, suddenly I was buying all sorts of things I didn't have for my old car. What if I break down? I got, a blanket to put back there. I got some umbrellas to keep in the doors. I bought a special tool that was a seatbelt cutter, like all these things that, I never thought that I would need. Suddenly I'm buying all of them. You can imagine this happening in your personal life as well. This kind of one behavior leads to the next thing. You go to the bathroom, you wash your hands, and then after you wash your hands, like, oh, I need to dry them. And then picking up the towel reminds you, oh, I need to do the laundry. And then doing the laundry reminds you, oh, we're out of detergents and I need to go buy some, and on and on and on. And so many areas of life have this kind of chain of behaviors that are naturally happening, this momentum that feeds from one action to the next. So the same concept of momentum that we see through Diderot's story can be applied to the habits that we build each day. You take one habit and you build it and you make a small improvement, and then you let that energy feed into the next instance. In many ways, life is a game of momentum. And one of the powerful things about starting with small habits is that you make it easy for yourself to show up each day, but you also make it easy for yourself to get a win. This same concept of momentum that we see from Diderot can be applied to your habits. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to figure out a way to get the momentum to feed into the new habit that you're trying to build. And one of the best ways to do this is to have a clear plan for when and where your habits are going to occur. If you have a specific plan for when you're going to implement a habit, you're much more likely to follow through. There are a variety of studies that have shown this to be true. So this is a concept that researchers would refer to as implementation intentions. So what is an implementation intention? It's a very specific plan for when and where you're going to implement the behavior. So for example, it might be something like filling out this sentence. I will perform X behavior on this day, at this time, in this place. And simply by filling out that sentence, you are much more likely to follow through. For example, I will get my flu shot on November 14th at this facility at this time. I will drop off the recycling on Sunday night at 8 p.m. at this location. And each time that you fill out a sentence like that or have a very clear plan for when and where you're going to implement the habit, you're more likely to follow through. Now, once you start to show up, you get this feeling of momentum. You get this feeling of progress. And so the more that you do these small things in a consistent way, the more likely they are to build upon each other in the long run. One of the biggest lessons of all this is that many people feel like they lack motivation when what they really lack is clarity. You know, a lot of people, we wake up and we kind of think, I hope I feel motivated to go to the gym today, or I hope I feel motivated to write that report today, or whatever. We're just kind of hoping that the inspiration will strike us. But implementation intentions kind of shortcuts that problem and says, this is when and this is where the behavior is going to occur. And by having a very specific plan for that, you're much more likely to follow through on it. It's kind of like the discipline has already been pre-decided. You know, for myself, I work out at the same time 5 days a week. And when that time shows up, I'm not choosing to work out in a sense. It's like, no, like this is just what happens at that time. Any strategy that you can have that makes that decision ahead of time and gets things very clear and clearly aligned in your mind puts you in a better position to follow through. This idea that there's a perfect time to make a change, there is no perfect time. There's just a day where at some point you have to make a choice. And maybe the day is now. The first law of behavior change is make it obvious. Behavior change starts with self-awareness. Set an implementation intention. So a quick assignment for you. Go ahead and take a minute to fill out your own implementation intention. So fill out this sentence. I will perform this habit on this day, at this time, in this place. So just fill that sentence out and have a very clear plan for when and where you're going to implement your habit. Coming up, want to know why some habits are easy to pick up and others are more difficult? The second law of behavior change is to make it attractive. And the more attractive your habits are, the more compelling or appealing they are, the more motivating or enticing they are, the more you're going to feel like doing it. And so the more attractive a habit is, the better positioned you are to actually follow through. You can imagine a bunch of different ways to do this. There are some short-term ways and some long-term ways to increase the attractiveness of your habits. One of the short-term ways is to get other people enlisted, to get other people kind of involved in it. So for me, one of the key habits that I like to perform in my job is to send a newsletter every week. And so, I send out a new newsletter every Thursday. That's a really crucial habit for my business, but I don't always feel like writing on Thursday. So I try to do whatever I can to make that habit as attractive as possible. And one of the things is I have someone on my team who helps me prep the draft for that email. If you know my newsletter, there are like kind of 6 pieces of information in it. And most weeks, I will change all 6 things that are in the template that she sends to me. But it's much more attractive for me to be working on a draft that's already there than for me to be staring at a blank page. And so just reducing a little bit of that friction, getting somebody else involved. Also, I know that if I didn't do it, I'm dropping the ball on my end, right? Like she's expecting it too. Getting that back to her really helps a lot. The process of changing your habits is really just the process of changing the story that you have in your mind, of reprogramming your brain in some way. The truth is, every habit that you perform, you have some story in your mind about why you're doing it. So when you see a cookie and choose to eat it, you have a story in your mind that cookies are tasty and enjoyable, and that's why I want to do it. When you check your email incessantly throughout the day, you have a story in your mind about, I need to be checking email because that's what it means to be productive, and that's how I stay up to date on things at work, and so on. And it's like that for every habit that you have. If you can change that story about how you're benefiting or why you're benefiting from doing this behavior, then your behavior often shifts naturally. And so, to some degree, if you can reprogram your brain, then you can really change your behavior in a fast and efficient way. For example, Ed Lattimore, who's a writer and a boxer, his little writing rituals, he would go to the same spot in the library each day to write, and then he'd put his headphones on, and he would play the same playlist each time. Now, he realized one day, he sat down at the library desk, he's got his laptop open, he's writing, he's been doing a couple different sentences, he's making his way down the page. He wasn't listening to anything, he just had his headphones on, he was just sitting there in silence. And what he realized was just the act of sitting at the table, opening up his laptop and putting his headphones on, that was enough to get him in the pregame routine, to get his mind going and be like, oh, it's time to write. He had forgotten to press play because he was already into the habit. And the idea there is not to copy what I did or what Ed did, but just to come up with a ritual that feels right for you. To come up with a sequence of steps that gets you in the right flow, that gets you in the right mindset, and then you're like, okay, now it's time for me to sit down and do my thing. But there's also a more rapid way to do it, which is you can just utilize these little, I like to call them like mindset reframes. And some of these little phrases, they can really get you in a different mindset. For example, Nelson Mandela, he has a great one where he says, I never lose, I either win or I learn. And I love that as just a little quick mindset rephrase of what it means to succeed or fail. And he's like, well, it's not failure, it's just learning. And all types of little things like that can be useful as you go on this journey to building better habits. For example, I had a strength and conditioning coach in college. He had this great little line where he would say, you guys are going to come in here and you're going to tell me all the stuff that you have to do. I have to do this workout. I have to do this, this terrible set of sprints that you're going to ask me to do. I have to go study for exams. I have to go wake up early and go to class. He loved to always reframe it for us. He would say, no, like, you get to do this workout. You get to do this set of sprints. You get to go study for exams. You get to wake up early for class. And simple reframes like that. I don't lose, I learn, or I don't have to, I get to. There are a variety of things like that that can help reprogram the way that you view the opportunity that's in front of you right now. And sometimes those short-term mindset reframes can really help. And that difference between have to and get to, it helps reframe things. It transforms the things throughout your day from seeing like an obligation to becoming an opportunity. So if we take financial savings, for example, I had a couple readers who, they wanted to save more money. They realized that they were eating out for meals a lot. And so they thought, well, maybe we can start cooking for ourselves and not eat out as frequently throughout the week. And we can save some of that money. Again, just kind of this habit of avoidance. They're like, well, if we don't go out to eat, we're just kind of, nothing's happening. We're just not going out to eat. So like, that's not that fun. And then we got to put work in to cook this meal. So that caused a little bit of friction there. And they tried to find a way to make it enjoyable. And so what they did was they opened up this separate savings account and they labeled it Trip to Europe. And then anytime they didn't go out to eat, they would transfer, $50 or $100 or whatever into that account. And so now they still aren't going out to eat. They don't have the immediate return on that, but they do have this little signal in the moment of, hey, this is enjoyable. This is a little more attractive because we can see this bank account increasing, even though we're not getting the meal. The strategies that we talked about so far for making habits attractive, they're mostly short-term in timeline. They're mostly focused on getting you going this week or this month. Like, they're good for overcoming procrastination, getting yourself going, getting started. But if you really want a habit to stick for the long run, like if you really want this to last for years or who knows, in some cases even decades, then that level of consistency with your habits, almost always, there's some kind of social component involved. Now, that doesn't always mean you do it with somebody, but it does mean that the expectation that you do it or the social groups you're a part of, it's the norm in that group. Let's say I walk outside my house and I look across the street and I see my neighbor, they're mowing their lawn. I might think, oh man, I need to cut the grass too. And you'll stick to that habit of mowing your lawn for 5 years or 10 years or 30 years, like however long you live in the house, and like, why do we do it? Partially you do it because it feels good to have a clean lawn, but mostly it feels good to have a clean lawn because you don't want to be judged by the other people in the neighborhood for being the sloppy one. And so it's actually that social expectation that gets you to follow through on the habit. It's the fact that this is what it means to be a neighbor on this street, and this is how everybody kind of expects you to operate, that gets you to follow through. Now, we wish we had that level of consistency with many of our other habits. We wish we could follow through for that long. So how do we utilize that force, that social expectation, in more beneficial ways? Humans are herd animals. We want to fit in to avoid conflict. So behaviors are attractive when they help us fit in. We copy the way our coworkers get results, or we copy the way our friends communicate, or we copy the way our partner keeps the house tidy. The second law of behavior change is make it attractive. The more attractive a behavior, the more habit forming it is. Reprogram your story. Reframe your mindset from have to get to. Socialize your habit. So an assignment for you with this. As you think about how to make your habits more attractive, you can ask yourself, what groups am I a part of? Who do I belong to? Where do I hang out? And how can I expose myself to people who have the habits that I want to have? How can I join groups where my desired behavior is the normal behavior? It's easy to want big changes fast, but I want you to go in the other direction. Jerry Uelsman was a professor at the University of Florida, taught photography, and he did this interesting thing. Walked into his class on the first day of the semester. He said, all right, we're going to draw a line right down the middle of the class. Everybody on this side, at the end of the semester, you're going to be judged based on the quality of your work. So you only got to produce one photo throughout the semester, but it needs to be the best possible photo you can make. Then everybody on this side of the class, you're going to be judged differently. We're going to judge your grade based on the quantity of your work. So 100 photos, this is a film photography class. They got to, take the photos, process them, and so on. So he said 100 photos, it's going to be an A. 90 photos complete will be a B. 70, 80 a C, and so on. He noticed this interesting thing. Term goes to the end. They get to the end of the semester, and he realized all the best photos were actually taken by the quantity group, not the quality group. And the interesting part about that is that the quantity group was out there trying. They were honing their skills. They were, trying different angles and perspectives, working with different forms of light, gradually building this skill set for what it meant to take a great photo. And they got to the end of the term, and they had actually built skills that led to a better result. Whereas the quality group spent most of the semester theorizing about what the best photo would be or trying to think about where could be the perfect location or the perfect time of day to take something. At the end of the term, they didn't have enough iteration. They didn't have enough trial and error to have actually developed their skills to the degree to have something exceptional. And of course, there are all kinds of lessons we can take from that on the importance of quantity over quality, the importance of repetition and the necessity of repetition for building skills, developing habits, and gradually improving and getting a little bit better each day. So if you remember, we broke a habit into 4 stages, and the third stage is the response. And the third law of behavior change is all about making it easy. It's about making that response easy, making the habit as easy as possible to perform. And the easier a habit is, the more convenient or frictionless it is, the more simple or straightforward it is, the more likely it is to occur. And this is perhaps the first place the usage should start. It's the third law, but it might be the most important thing when it comes to building a better habit. The photography story teaches that you can spend all day thinking about the best approach, but that's not helpful if you never take action. Motion and action may sound similar, but they're not. When you're in motion, you're planning and strategizing, but that doesn't lead to a result. Life rewards action, not planning. I like to make this division between motion and action. Motion is often prep, it's research, it's planning, things that you do beforehand that can help you do a better job, but they don't deliver a result on their own. Whereas action is the type of thing that can deliver the result that you're looking for. In my case, reading, although it's essential for my job, and almost all the ideas that I write about are downstream from what I read, reading books will never produce something for me. It'll never lead to a newsletter. It will never lead to a book. It's not an action, it's motion. Whereas sitting down to actually write a newsletter or to write a chapter of a book, that is a habit that's action. So reading is motion, writing is action, in my particular case, in my particular work. Another example, doesn't matter how many times you go to the gym and talk to a personal trainer, talking to a personal trainer will never get you in shape. Doesn't mean you shouldn't have one, doesn't mean they're not useful. It just means that that's motion, whereas getting under the bar and doing a set of squats is action because it can get you the result that you want. The problem is that motion is usually a little bit easier to do. It's a little bit easier to send an email to a personal trainer and find out about their rates and how they work. It's a little bit easier to read a book than it is to write one. And we often use motion as an excuse for taking action. We use it as a justification for like, oh no, I'm doing something, I'm making a little bit of progress, but actually we aren't moving the needle on the real thing that drives results. So motion is fine if it complements the action that you're taking. If it substitutes for your actions, then you've lost the thread and you're no longer moving forward. The third law of behavior change is to make it easy, but that doesn't mean only do easy things. It means make it as easy as possible to do the things that pay off in the long run. If it meant only do easy things, you could find yourself in motion all day long. But because it means do the things that pay off in the long run in the easiest way possible, it encourages you to focus on the high leverage actions, on the most important actions, on the things that really drive results. And by making those things easier, you put yourself in a position to get results while making each day feel reasonable. One strategy that researchers and scientists sometimes use with people when they're trying to shape a new habit or behavior is they use a process called habit shaping, where you start with a very, very easy version of the habit, and then you build into something more gradually. You build into a larger version of it. So for example, you might start with something really simple like getting your running shoes on and walking around the block, and then eventually you're running, half a mile, and then you're doing 5 miles, and then you sign up for a half marathon and so on. You can imagine this idea of habit shaping applying to many different habits in life. Let's say you want to become an early riser, for example. The very easy version of that is maybe we don't focus at all at the time that you're waking up. We just start with, what's my power down routine look like at night? Can I optimize my power down routine? Can I make sure that I shut screens off by 10 p.m., that I get into a good flow, going to bed at the same time every night? That's the first part of it. Then once you've optimized that, you move into the next phase, which is I'm not going to worry about moving my time up. I'm just going to try to get to bed at the same time each night, and I'm going to optimize my wake up routine. So now I'm going to get up in the same way. I'm going to always, get up the first time my alarm goes off. I won't press snooze and so on. And then you can imagine just kind of progressing this forward until eventually you get to the point where you're going to bed at the same time each night. You have this power down routine. You get up as soon as your alarm goes off, and then you start inching the timing up more and more. And so eventually you're getting up at 6:30 and then 6:15, and then it gets earlier and earlier as you go through the shaping process. So you start with a very easy version. In some cases, you're not even really getting the result you want yet. You're just starting with laying the groundwork. And then you shape yourself gradually toward the ultimate outcome that you're trying to build. Obviously, I hope you find the whole class useful. I hope there's a lot of ideas in here that you can take and run away with and implement and utilize. But if you could only remember one idea, the 2-minute rule might be a good one to remember. And I say that because the 2-minute rule can be applied to pretty much any habit you're trying to build. And it's very simple. It just says, take whatever habit you're trying to create and you scale it down to something that takes 2 minutes or less to do, right? So read 30 books a year becomes read 1 page. Or do yoga 4 days a week becomes take out my yoga mat. Or in my case, write a newsletter every week becomes write 1 sentence. Sometimes people resist that a little bit. They're like, okay, buddy, I know the real goal isn't just to take my yoga mat out. I know I'm actually trying to do the workout. So it's some kind of mental trick, and I know it's a trick, then why would I fall for it, basically? And, I get where people are coming from, but I have this reader. His name's Mitch. He lost over 100 pounds. He's kept it off for more than a decade. And he had this strange little rule for himself where when he went to the gym, he wasn't allowed to stay for longer than 5 minutes. So he'd get in the car, drive to the gym, get out, do half an exercise, get back in the car, drive home. And it sounds silly, right? It sounds ridiculous. You're like, clearly this is not going to get the guy the results that he wants. But if you take a step back, what you realize is that he was mastering the art of showing up. You know, he was becoming the type of person that went to the gym 4 days a week, even if it was only for 5 minutes. And this is a much deeper truth about habits, which is a habit must be established before it can be improved. You know, it has to become the standard in your life before you can scale it up and turn it into something more. I don't know why we do this, but we tend to get very all or nothing about our habits. You know, we're so focused on finding the best workout program, the perfect diet plan, the ideal sales strategy. We're so focused on optimizing that we don't give ourselves permission to show up, even if it's just in a small way. If you can't master the art of showing up, you know, if you can't be the kind of person who goes to the gym for 5 minutes, who cares how good the 45-minute workout plan is? You know, it's just a theory at that point. And so the 2-minute rule pushes back against that perfectionist tendency. It encourages you to master the art of showing up, to scale it down and make it easy to do. And then once you've gained a foothold, you can advance to the next level. The third law of behavior change is make it easy. Know the difference between motion and action. Shape your habits to make them stick. Use the 2-minute rule. Here's an assignment for you. I want you to take a habit you are trying to create and think about how you can shape it. Start small. Think of the first task you take in completing this action. And once you accomplish this small task, if desired, you can continue scaling it up into something bigger, step by step. Creating new habits often comes down to one final step. For many years, chewing gum was this kind of like really bland, uninteresting resin. There were just these chewy little things or pellets that people would chew on every now and then throughout the 1800s. And then in 1891, Wrigley launched, and they were the first chewing gum company that added flavors to their chewing gum. Juicy fruit, spearmint. Suddenly the process of using chewing gum became an enjoyable, flavorful, pleasurable experience, and it transformed the habit that people had and how frequently they used the product. When you go through an experience, your brain is always analyzing what the outcome is. Is it favorable? Is it unfavorable? Is it just kind of neutral and doesn't really mean a whole lot? Generally speaking, we gravitate toward activities and behaviors that are enjoyable and pleasurable and rewarding, and we shy away from things that are unfavorable and unpleasurable and unrewarding. Your brain is kind of like this reward-seeking mechanism. It's always going throughout life trying to find things that are beneficial or that are enjoyable in some way. And the lesson related to habits for that is that if a behavior is not rewarding, if it's not pleasurable in some way, it's very hard for it to become a habit. So much so that I refer to this as the cardinal rule of behavior change, which is behaviors that are rewarded get repeated and behaviors that are punished get avoided. I think we could even layer something a little bit extra on top of that, which is behaviors that get immediately rewarded get repeated and behaviors that get immediately punished get avoided. At a fundamental level, this kind of taps into our evolutionary wiring. If you talk to scientists and researchers, they may describe what our ancestors lived in as an immediate return environment. And what they mean is that most of the choices that your ancestors were making and that people were making throughout human history were related to their immediate outcome. So taking shelter from a storm right now, trying to figure out where the next meal was going to come from, foraging in the berry bush, or trying to avoid a lion on the savannah. It was all related to immediate safety, immediate rewards. Over the broad arc of human history, the shape of evolution is to design humans that are really good at optimizing for those immediate rewards. In modern society, however, we live in more of a delayed return environment. You go to school today so that you can graduate in 4 years. You save for retirement today so that you can retire in decades. You're always putting this effort in. You show up at work this week so that you can get a paycheck at the end of the month. And so a lot of our choices in the modern environment are delayed. We're building these habits today for the hope of a payoff in the future. But we're walking around in modern society with the same kind of Paleolithic hardware in our brains. And so the same brain that was optimized for immediate return environments throughout the arc of your ancestors is the same kind of hardware that you have today. And as a result, we often prioritize immediate rewards over delayed ones. And this is one of the reasons why delaying gratification can be difficult. And this really comes into play with habits because the rewards of many habits are delayed. It's the value of delaying gratification that gets you the results that you want, but you're kind of fighting against your natural inclination to seek an immediate reward. So as best as possible, you want to get those two things lined up. You want to find ways for your good habits to be immediately rewarding and to find ways for your bad habits to have an immediate consequence. So in the 1990s, there's this guy named Trent Dursman. He reached out to me a few years ago and told me this story. Trent's this young salesman in Abbotsford, Canada. And he goes into the company and they give him this small book of business and they tell him, you know, it's your job to grow it and build upon it and so on. He started out as the most junior person in the firm. But he had this interesting habit that he followed, which is he had 2 cups and he put them on his desk. And in the first one, there were 100 paper clips. And each day he would show up and he'd make a sales call and he would move 1 paper clip over. And gradually his objective each day was simply to move over 100 paper clips. So make 100 calls a day. And he had this little visual signal of progress as he's going through it. And that one simple habit drove enormous success for him. pretty soon after, within a couple of years, he had the largest book of business in the firm. He was one of the most successful salespeople the firm had. And this was in a relatively small market at the time. It wasn't this like thriving metropolis compared to, New York or LA or some of these larger places. And so he was getting exceptional results driven almost entirely by this one very simple habit. And there's something important that his story illustrates, which is the power of having signals of progress. One of the most motivating things for someone is seeing their progress. A habit tracker is any simple system you use to track each instance of your habit. So it just gives you a signal that you showed up that day. One of the challenges with building better habits is that a lot of the returns are delayed. You show up, you do the right thing, but you don't have any signal that the work you put in that day was worth it. You're showing up and you've run for a month, but you don't see a change in your body, or you've written for, 9 months and the book still isn't finished. You have no evidence that all the hard work you're putting in is paying off yet. And what Trent had was he had this long timeline. It still took him a couple years to build up this massive book of business. But on a daily basis, he had signals of progress because each time he'd make that call, he'd move a little paperclip over. And the process of moving those paperclips over, seeing them accumulate throughout the day, seeing the stack in each of the cups shift and change, that was meaningful because it gave him this feeling of momentum. Within a year and a half, he was bringing in $5 million in annual sales. And the point is, visual measures help demonstrate your progress. And making progress is highly satisfying. And it doesn't have to be paper clips on a desk, but it's all the same idea. It's trying to give you a visual signal that, hey, you showed up today, you did the right thing, and you're making progress. Rob Dyrdek, famous skateboarder and also television producer, very successful entrepreneurial career. He also has a large real estate portfolio. He's an incredibly successful entrepreneur, has had his hands in many different things throughout life. He also is a great example of someone who has habits and systems organized around optimizing his time, making sure he's focusing on the things that matter most to him. He has this spreadsheet where he analyzes each chunk of his day, breaks his life into 3 categories. He has work, he has family time, and he has sleep. And he tries to make sure that he gives 8 hours towards each on any given day. And this process that he has, it's a very systemized approach, and he utilizes a lot of the things that we've talked about, from making it obvious, making it easy, and so on. And what he's been able to do is shape a life for himself where he spends his time on the things that are most important to him, work projects that fill him up, family time that he finds really enjoyable and satisfying and meaningful, and then also taking care of his health. He's a good example of someone who can perform at an extremely high level and succeed really well while also living a balanced life. That's my hope and my advice for each of you, that you can take the strategies from this course and you can apply them to the work that you're doing, the personal life that you have, and the health that you're trying to build to live a balanced and satisfying life, whatever that ends up meaning for you. It's a very adaptable framework and adaptable strategies, and you can take those and utilize them in the way that feels best fit for what you're trying to achieve. The 4th law of behavior change is make it satisfying. We likely stick to a habit when our experience is satisfying. Reward the good habit immediately. What is immediately rewarded is repeated. Track progress to feel successful. So a quick assignment for you here related to this 4th law. Remember, the objective is to try to make it satisfying. So let's try to find some ways to visualize your progress. Find some ways to give yourself a signal that you're moving in the right direction. One simple thing you can do is just develop your own habit tracker. Pick one habit that you're trying to build and then have some way of tracking it. Maybe it's moving paper clips over into a bowl. Maybe it's pulling up a calendar and putting an X down each time you do the habit. But give yourself some signal that you showed up today and you did the right thing. Coming up next, I'm going to use my framework to show you how to tackle the most common habits you want to build or break. So the 4 laws of behavior change are: make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, make it satisfying. And if you're sitting there thinking, I have this habit that I'm trying to build, I just keep procrastinating on it, or maybe you're thinking about it in a work context, hey, we have this behavior, we keep asking people on the team to do it consistently, but they only do it every now and then, you can just go through those 4 steps and ask yourself, how can I make the behavior more obvious? How can I make it more attractive? How can I make it easier? How can I make it more satisfying? The answers to those 4 questions will reveal different steps that you can take for increasing the odds that the behavior is going to occur. Now, there are many ways to do each of these things. There are many ways to make habits obvious, many ways to make them attractive, many ways to make them easy, and so on. And we're going to unpack a lot of it now. And so what I want to do is to share some examples with you, and I want to go through those now and kind of give you an idea of what these might look like in practice. I've received some messages from masterclass students, and people are asking some common questions about building habits and which ones they should focus on, how they can apply these 4 laws to the different habits they're thinking about. So let me take a look at some of those now and share them with you. So this first one asks, I want to be more productive, avoid procrastination. What would it look like to apply the 4 laws to that? It's a good question. What is productive and what task or what habit you should be building is going to change depending on the person. For me, the most productive thing is always writing the next piece of content. So as an example of this, what would be the goal and what would be the system? Well, your goal might be to write every day. Your system is the collection of habits that lead to that. So let's just take something really simple and just say, I just need to sit down in the chair and write a couple sentences, right? So how can I make that obvious? Well, First thing I could do is I could get a little post-it note the night before, and I could write out the topic that I'm going to write about and just stick it right on top of the keyboard. So as soon as I walk into my office, I just have a reminder right there. It's ready for me. I could also open the Google Doc ahead of time and just have it sitting there on the screen. So the first thing I see when I open it up, it's right in front of me. So make it obvious. How can I make it attractive? I have this little rule for myself where I'm allowed to write about whatever I'm excited about. It's just got to be something I'm fascinated in. So that's maybe the first step there is let's choose a topic that I'm really amped up about. How do I make it easy? Give yourself permission, just write one sentence. It doesn't have to be the whole page, doesn't have to be the entire thing. The only thing you have to do your job is write one sentence. And then how can I make it satisfying? Frankly, for me, any day that I actually sit down and write is satisfying because I don't have the guilt of not writing, but you can come up with many different things that you could do. For example, after you successfully complete your writing session, you could go get your favorite drink at a coffee shop, or you could open up social media and browse for 15 minutes, or you could give yourself 15 minutes of free time outside. There are a million different variants of that, but just pick something that feels like, hey, I'm layering this onto the habit and it makes it more satisfying for me in the moment. Ultimately, what we're hoping to get to is you feel satisfied just because you showed up and did the right thing. Okay, so this next one is just about saving up money for a house. What would it look like to make a habit out of that? So, your goal might be to save money for your dream home. Your system is the collection of financial habits and behaviors that help get you there. So make it obvious. For example, you could have some kind of tally or spreadsheet or a little tracking device on your fridge in your home or somewhere that's obvious. And each day or each week that you save up toward that ultimate goal, you put a little X down or you check it off, and that gives you some signal right there. It's right in front of your face. Hey, I'm doing this each day. And then make it attractive. This could just be about envisioning what you want to achieve. So envisioning the home that you'd like to have, or the home that you're ultimately trying to invest in. And then make it easy is just about automating. This could be about automating the investment from the bank account. So it's as easy as possible. You don't even have to think about it. Truthfully, technology is great for this, for automating habits, and automatic savings deposits are a good example of it. The automation of a habit is done well enough. The other three steps sometimes don't even matter. You don't even need to worry about making it obvious or attractive. If it's just automatically coming out of the account every month, then it's already done for you. And then finally, the reward is just the purchase of the house. It's going to be incredibly satisfying after putting that work in to get the home that you're hoping to ultimately have. So we have a student that asked about quitting smoking. What would it look like to break that habit? How could I apply the 4 laws in that way? So for building a good habit, it's all about making it obvious, attractive, easy, satisfying. For breaking a bad habit, you want to invert those 4. So rather than making it obvious, you want to make it invisible. Rather than making it attractive, you want to make it unattractive. Rather than making it easy, you want to make it difficult. Rather than making it satisfying, you want to make it unsatisfying. So for each of those 4, we can start to think, how would that apply to smoking? So how do I make smoking invisible? This is mostly about not having cigarettes around. So if you pass the store where you always buy cigarettes on your commute, maybe you need to change the route that you take on your commute so that you don't see that queue every time that you go to work. Don't have cigarettes in the house, don't have cigarettes in the office, all those kind of things, reducing exposure to the queue. How do I make it unattractive? This one's a little bit tricky, and it's harder for bad habits because you kind of already know that you enjoy smoking. Ultimately, it's about shifting that identity, going from I'm the type of person who smokes to, oh, no, thanks, I'm not a smoker. And once you start to see yourself in that light, it puts you in a little bit of a better position to be like, you know what, a cigarette just isn't really that attractive to me anymore. It's not part of who I am. I will say, though, shifting your identity or changing how attractive a bad habit seems is more of a long-term game than a short-term game. It's hard to just flip a switch in your mind and be like, oh, I don't like that anymore, just at the drop of a hat. But gradually, you can get there if your behavior starts to lead you in that direction. How do I make it difficult? Again, this can be about not having the cigarettes around, so things like that. But there also is an important distinction to make here when breaking bad habits, which is you have a couple different methods that are at your disposal. One is you could just quit it. You can eliminate, try to quit cold turkey. So that is an option. But you also could reduce it. So you could do it occasionally, but just not as much as you did before. Or, and perhaps best in this case, you could replace it. So rather than giving yourself the difficult ask of how do I just not do it? How do I just not smoke anymore? What's going to take that place for you? Is there something, what does smoking give you? Does it give you social interaction? Does it give you some kind of physical sensation? Is there a way to substitute something that can give you that same outcome and take its place? And then finally, how do I make it unsatisfying? There are some things that maybe you could try here, but ultimately it doesn't matter that much because it's on the back end of the habit. So for bad habits, by the time you get to the unsatisfying part, the habit's already done, right? You've already taken the action. So generally speaking, my recommendation for breaking a bad habit is to focus on the first stage, so the cue, how do I reduce exposure to it, and the third stage, the actual response, how do I make it difficult to do it? And if you do a good job at the first and the third stage, then you've stopped the habit and you don't even need to worry about the fourth one because the action doesn't happen. So I applied this framework to smoking, but it can be used for other bad habits like eating junk food or spending too much time on social media. So I hope you see, no matter what habit you have, you can kind of break it down through these 4 steps, come up with a system for your habits and behaviors, and put yourself in a better position to build them for the long run. And it doesn't mean that you always need to have all 4 pieces working for you. It doesn't mean that it always needs to be set up perfectly, but this is a system of tools. It's a method that you can take and apply to any habit that you're trying to build, and it'll put you in a good position to follow through on it consistently. To better understand common habits, the 4 laws of behavior change can be applied to creating any habit. When breaking a bad habit, we must reverse the 4 laws, make it invisible, unattractive, difficult, and unsatisfying. For this assignment, I want you to pick out a habit you are trying to create and put it through the same sort of speed round exercise we just did. How can you make it obvious? How can you make it attractive? How can you make it easy? How can you make it satisfying? Charting this out can be your first step towards adopting this new habit, so give it a try. Coming up, is lack of sleep turning you into a zombie at work? I'm going to tell you about the 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. habits at home that affect your 9 to 5 habits at work and how you can break them. We all have these habits and these behaviors that we perform each day that impact how we feel and whether we show up in a consistent manner. When COVID hit in the early part of 2020, everything changed. All of a sudden, overnight, people had this big shift in their environment or their commutes or their working strategy. It used to be that, the pantry was at your house while you were at the office and it was miles away. But now it's right around the corner and you can snack anytime. Or it used to be that your kitchen table was the place where you ate breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And now it's the place where you do emails and take Zoom calls. And so which one is it? Is it the place where it's there for personal life or is it there for professional life? And this blending of context, this merging of the different environments for personal and professional use has led to a blending of habits. It's led to all sorts of things where you pick some new habits up that maybe you weren't even trying to pick up. You lose some habits that you didn't even realize hinged so critically on your previous environment. And so there's been a big shift in behavior. And there are all sorts of studies before the pandemic that kind of indicated this kind of thing might happen. If you're working from home and you have different inputs coming into you, whether it's children running through the room or delivery people dropping off boxes at the door, all of that is a form of interruption that prevents you from performing at a high level on the work task. And there's a balance to all of this, right? Like we have to decide what do we want to emphasize. But it all collectively builds toward what it looks like to have a productive day or what it looks like to perform at your highest level. And so the things that you do at home, you're carrying into work each day. And in many ways, you're not in a position to do your best work if you're not bringing your best self to work each day. Everything is connected. I mean, if you're not sleeping well at home, hard to perform well at work. If you're distracted at home and you have fractured attention, your time is divided, you don't have as much capacity for the time that you're working. So optimizing some of those basic habits of energy. Am I sleeping enough? Am I eating decently? Am I, working out consistently or having some form of movement or activity in my life? But I think it goes even deeper than that because we spend so much time looking at screens now, so much time on our phones, on our laptops and computers. And so the choices that you make on your screen at home often end up shaping what you spend your time at throughout the workday. For example, maybe you download Instagram when you're at home, but then you find yourself scrolling mindlessly for 30 minutes while you're at work. And in many ways, I think scrolling mindlessly is probably the greatest interruption that we all have. It's so top of mind. It's so right next to you at all times that it's there to interrupt almost any focused creative task that you're trying to work on. So by dialing those habits back in, by getting them under control, by optimizing your technology habits or your consumption habits, you put yourself in a better position to do better work each day. So there are a couple different things that you can keep in mind. So the first idea is what I would call one space, one use. So, if you can have a separate room, so like, hey, this is my office in this particular room, well, great, then work can happen in there and your personal life can happen elsewhere. Not everybody has enough space to have a separate room, so maybe you have a zone in a room. For example, let's say you're trying to build a new habit of reading, but whenever you sit down on your couch, you find yourself getting distracted, and so you want to turn the remote on or turn on the TV. So instead, you can create a reading zone. You just get a little chair, put it in the corner. The only thing that happens in that chair is this is where I sit down and read. And you can apply that same kind of philosophy of having zones or one space, one use to any habit that you're trying to build. And the more that a habit is tied to a particular context, the more that it's tied to a dedicated zone where you do it, the more likely it is that that habit's going to stick and the less likely it is that you're going to get distracted and get pulled into something else. It's when you try to perform multiple habits in the same zone that it becomes difficult for your brain to be like, hey, what happens here? Is the couch the place where I take the Zoom call, or is it the place where I turn on the TV? Or is it the place where I just hang out and read a book? If all those things are happening in the same spot, then it becomes hard for your brain to parse which one it should do, and it's easy to get distracted. I'm like everybody else, right? If I have my phone in front of me, I'll check it every 3 minutes just because it's there, But there are all sorts of things you can do with your phone, whether it's locking it down or turning it to grayscale or, turning notifications off. There are all sorts of things you can do there to try to optimize or improve the odds that you don't get interrupted. But you can also do that with physical spaces. And the basic idea here is you want fewer steps between you and the desired behavior and more steps between you and the undesired behavior. My classic example here is I have a home office. So a little rule that I try to follow, and I don't do it every day, but I probably do it 80% of the time, is I try to leave my phone in another room until lunch each day. Now, I don't always do it, but when I do, I almost always have a better morning. It's because I get to work on my agenda. I get to respond to the things that I find most appropriate or most important, not the things that everybody else is pushing onto my plate. And I always think it's funny, if I really wanted it, I could just walk down the hallway and go get it. It's only 30 seconds away, but I never do. Like, why not? You know, like in the one sense, I wanted my phone so bad that I would check it every 3 minutes when it was in front of me. But in another sense, I never wanted it bad enough to work 30 seconds to get it. And you'd be surprised how many habits are like that. They will curtail themselves to the desired degree if you just introduce a little bit of friction. You can kind of take back the reins. You can put yourself in the driver's seat again by optimizing your physical environment, by trying to improve your digital environment, optimize the screens you look at, and by implementing these concepts like one space, one use, so that you have a clear space for where you build your habits and where you focus on them. And I think if you use strategies like that, you're in a better position to shape your habits rather than have them shape you. We've covered a range of concepts in this class, talked about how habits work, how to break them down, some practical strategies for making progress on the habits that are important to you. At this point, the main thing is just motivating yourself to take action, deciding to take that first step. And the truth is, you can scale it down. You know, you don't need to make it some huge thing on the first day. All you're trying to do is live one good day. How can you wake up today, do your best, try to find some small way to improve, some 1% improvement that you can make, live a good day, go to sleep, and try to do it again tomorrow. And as the days stack up, you'll find that those small changes, those reasonable approaches that you take on any given day, stack into something much greater. They begin to multiply and compound over time. Time will magnify whatever you feed it. If you have good habits, time becomes your ally, and all you need is patience. If you have bad habits, time becomes your enemy, and every day that goes by, you kind of dig the hole a little bit deeper. And so what we're really emphasizing here, we're talking about taking these small actions, getting 1% better. We're emphasizing trajectory rather than position. You know, there's a lot of discussion about position in life. What's the number on the scale? How much money's in the bank account? What's the current stock price? We have all these measurements, all these ways of analyzing what our current position is. And then often there's some judgment that comes from that. Oh, I haven't achieved what I said I wanted to achieve, or we haven't made the progress we said we wanted to make. And what I'm encouraging is to say, listen, just for a minute, let's take a step back, not worry so much about our current position, and instead focus a little bit more on our current trajectory. Are we getting 1% better or 1% worse? Are you building some small habits that push you in the right direction? Because if so, all you need is time. And so what I'd like to encourage you to do is to scale your habits down, make it simple, utilize those 4 laws, and try to master the art of showing up. It's really just about showing up today, making a little small improvement, and letting that transform over time. Imagine the outcome that you want to create. Think about the habit that you're trying to build, and then take small steps towards that. And, you know, a lot of the time we'll tell ourselves, oh, I'm not ready yet. I need to learn more. I need to, figure out something. I need to find a better approach. And we think that we need to have motivation to get started. But the truth is, motivation often comes after starting, not before. It's by scaling it down, finding some small way to get started, that you find yourself building momentum, gaining motivation, feeling compelled to do even more. I don't want you to rush. I don't want you to kind of run into this and try to do too much, but there's also no reason to wait. Don't rush, but don't wait. Let's take action now, have a bias toward action, and use those small changes to accumulate remarkable results.